His Royal Highness, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished participants. When the discussion focuses on the future of natural resources on our planet, it is directly linked to the core mandate and the preoccupation also of those of us who work in the United Nations, and in particular in the United Nations Environment Programme. I want to thank you for giving me an opportunity to address you briefly by means of this video message on the occasion of the World Resources Forum returning to the beautiful town of Davos. In recent years, public awareness about the state of our planet and also the patterns of resource consumption have become ever more prominent, both in the reporting in the media, but also in the research that is being undertaken by scientific institutions and in the policy arena that government officials, international organizations occupy. UNEP has, I think, over decades been at the forefront of trying to raise the public attention to both the emerging science about what is happening on our planet and also the patterns of consumption and production, which underpin both the evolution of our economies but also the future of our societies. As you focus on resource governance, sustainable innovation and lifestyle and values, I can only say that this is something we fully support, and through the presence also of Ernst Ulrich von Weizsäcker, who is the co-chair of UNEP's International Resources Panel, you have one of the most prominent authorities in the world being part of the discussion here in Davos. We have greatly benefited under his leadership and that of Ashok Khosla as the co-chair in bringing, if you want, the connection between science and policy through the work of the International Resources Panel to the attention of decision makers, both in government but also in the private sector. Some of the numbers, some of the findings, some of the figures that the International Resources Panel has brought to the attention of the world, be it in the area of resource consumption, be it in the area of material efficiency, or be it also in an area such as minerals and metals, has been both astonishing and far-reaching in terms of alerting the international community to the necessity of rethinking, if you want, the decoupling of economic development from resource consumption. We have, as always, in the arena of debate, in the policy arena, ideological positions. But what the International Resources Panel, I think, has helped us all to understand is that the solutions may be rooted in different economic, social and political models of response. The facts and the imperative to act are uncontestable. It is also one reason why in the work of the United Nations Environment Programme we have in recent years tried to forge a much closer discourse between the narrative of economic development and the imperative of sustainability in the domain of environment and natural resources. We have been enabled, in particular by the emergence of climate science and the understanding of global warming and climate change, to appreciate that we are at the beginning of the 21st century literally on the verge of having to reinvent our economies. The old discourse of development, which has an inherent chronological logic to it, namely that you first develop, then fix things and recover, if you want, the natural capital of our planet and of our economies, is simply no longer a feasible development paradigm and narrative in the 21st century. We are well beyond the 7 billion people figure on the planet. We are heading towards a 9 to 10 billion people figure on the planet. Our consumption and production patterns are such that we are still escalating our resource footprint on the planet. It is urgent that we bring the discourse of ecology, of science and of the environment together with the paradigms of economy and also of the social dimension of sustainable development. It was at the heart of the Rio+20 discussions, and however difficult they may have been in terms of the political arena, it is beyond question that the world has opened up a new set of questions that we must now answer. The negotiations in the context of the Open Working Group on defining a new set of sustainable development goals are an indication of an albeit slow but nevertheless quite dramatic shift in looking at the future of our planet and the future of the economies of 200 nations and 7 billion people in the context of universality. We also have a much more integrated approach because we know that progress in the economic domain at the expense of either environmental sustainability or social equity is simply not a feasible proposition any longer. Whether it is through social unrest or through environmental collapse, many of the risk factors driving today's rethink in economic policy terms and also in economic strategy are rooted in a greater understanding of the importance of trying to address the three dimensions of sustainable development. In UNEP we have tried to, if you want, shape a discourse around the notion of a transition towards a green economy. To some this may seem like an ecological redefinition of economic development. Well, that was not our intent. What we are trying to say is that there is a need for economic development to still gather pace. We know that we still have to provide more people with more food, more electricity, more services, more infrastructure. But what we have to achieve in the coming years is a fundamental decoupling and a transition towards a green economy which is both inclusive in social terms, looks at the issue of employment and equity, but also takes the environmental and scientific parameters of sustainability into the heart of defining economic strategy. It is in this discourse around the transition towards a green and inclusive economy that I believe we will redefine both the economic strategy but also the sectoral policies and the policy instruments that will allow us as consumers but also entrepreneurs, CEOs and public policymakers to finally recognize that development in the 21st century is something very different if we are going to move closer towards this elusive goal of sustainability and sustainable development. It is through the kinds of discussions that you convene at the World Resources Forum that we can sharpen both the understanding of what we already know, what we do not know, and what our policy options are. And indeed, in our Green Economy report, the most heartening aspect was that we found across the globe, in small and large economies, poor and rich economies, examples of how this transition is already being undertaken. It is there that we can get the greatest sense of both optimism and possibility for not accepting the notion that we are somehow doomed to continuing the resource equation of the 19th and 20th century. It is not viable, it is not necessary, and it is in our hands to reshape the public policy discourse. And I'm very grateful that you in Davos bring this community together, and also with decision makers such as Bruno Oberle, with whom I have worked very closely in recent years to try and forge a closer nexus between the economic and environmental discourse, that it is people like him who ultimately in public office will be at the heart of shaping the relationship between government, the regulatory world, the public policy arena, and all the rest of us in society, whether we are consumers, whether we are entrepreneurs, or whether we are simply people who wish to reduce our footprint. Thank you again for inviting me to address you by means of this video message, and I wish you an extremely successful World Resources Forum in Davos. Thank you.